for the trades. Y'all, I'm excited to dive into this conversation with you all tonight. We are talking about how contractors can grow their personal brand, and we've touched on this over the last couple of days here. But I want to dive deeper into this conversation of personal brand building because frankly, there is a lot of distance from where a lot of folks are engaging on their personal brand in the trades. You know, I'm thinking even about my dad and then some of our existing clients that we're kind of helping them get to the next phase in their personal brand. And we're starting from scratch in so many ways. And I want to talk about the mindset and the principle behind this before we dive into the practice of it. Because if we're showing up in a way where we have, you know, I'll actually go in this direction. Ego shows up in two very distinct ways. One of it is loud and kind of abrasive, taking up the spotlight. But ego can also show up in a way where we actually find a lot of kind of justification in actually staying away from the spotlight and maybe even hiding a little bit. And ego can even point the finger and say, it's almost like akin to the Pharisee in the biblical story of the tax collector who's on his knees saying, God, forgive me. And the Pharisee is praying with his, boldly to the heavens. And he says, thank God I am not like other men. Ego shows up that way. It shows up in the pride, in not taking the spotlight, in not showing up, in not flaunting. And actually both are just as damaging. So when we're thinking about how we're not showing up online, it's just as important that we consider the why there as why we would show up online. And it's not even just showing up online, y'all. This is where I want to talk about the mindset of, okay, why is this important? But also the principle of it as well, the principle behind a brand. You and I, every single one of us has a personal brand. I was speaking on a stage last year, and I asked everybody in the audience, raise your hand if you have a personal brand. And only about 30% of the group raised their hands. And what that did was that showed me that all these entrepreneurs, all these business owners, all thought that they did not have a personal brand. But the reality is, here's like the principle of a personal brand. You and I have one by default because no one else has our unique combination of story, experience, and soul. No one else has that unique combination. And here's the thing, other people have a lot of times our intellectual capabilities, our service capabilities, the ability to do the same job that we can do. But it's the unique combination of each one of these aspects, the values that we bring, the experience of the life lived, the depth of who we are, that when you add all of that together, it really is a unique combination that is you and no one else is you. And so really it actually does ourselves a great disservice to not cultivate that, because in the cultivation of it, we are effectively cultivating the way that we're showing up in the world, the way we're able to serve, the way that we're able to speak to our spouses, our children. Everyone else benefits when you and I take the time to cultivate our personal brand, because what that effectively is doing is cultivating ourselves. That is the principle of a personal brand. And we need to understand that, understanding, yes, the mindset, what's the why behind the cultivation of this? Am I doing it for what other people are going to think? Am I doing it for making money? Am I doing it for manipulation? Or is my why really tethered and tied to the core ethos of the principle of the brand, which is I want to cultivate myself for the betterment of the community, for the betterment of my family, for the betterment of my business. And when the mindset of why is tied to and rooted together with the principle, then we can talk about the practices and the external manifestation of a personal brand and how that can really make an impact for those around us. Zohaib, I just saw your comment. Good to see you. How much time does it take to build a personal brand? And so let's talk practices here, right? Because there's the practice in the internal self and the internal brand, and then the practices on the external. So for cultivating our internal selves, we have to know who we are in order to then market ourselves. So it starts with the internal knowing aspect to then have the external manifestation of it. So when you're asking about how much time does it take, I mean, man, it really is a couple of questions here. Where are you starting from? I was working with a coach who had worked with pretty high performance athletes. And he said at one point, we needed to take a GPS goal positioning survey. We need to take a GPS analysis. Where are we starting from? Because only then can we really have the gunshot fire and hit go and start moving in a direction. So what's the current state of how well you actually know the inner world, the inner brand? Because again, the quality of your inner brand is going to impact the quality of its external manifestation. So when we talk about knowing those components, number one, what are your values? Do you actually know your values well? And then second, are those values tied to a core story? Every single why in terms of our values is tied to an experience that we've had, whether it was an experience of hearing a narrative or whether it was tied to an experience that we physically engaged in. So do you know your values? Do you know the associated stories with them? Do you know truly what your superpower is? What are you so incredibly uniquely gifted in? Do you know why you're here? That's a big question. And it's not the end all be all why, but do you know why to the extent of this season of life? What's your mission? What are you called to do right now? And what does that look like? So each one of those is very, very important. You've got your values, your stories. You've got to really understand how they are working together in terms of your mission and your call. And then we can talk about, okay, well, what does that look like in practice? So the internal knowing and then the external manifestation of that brand. And so let's talk about some practices there. The external manifestation of that. Y'all, that storytelling component is so incredibly important. That adds weight to anything that you could say in terms of this is why I'm, nailing these values to the wall because of these stories associated with them. It can inform the business pricing of your services. It can inform who you hire, who you fire. Each one of the values that you hold, when it's based in a story, informs your business decisions across the board. It also informs the content that you put out into the world as well. And so, for example, I'm going to be hosting a retreat where we're going to be diving into the internal to really understand, okay, well, who are you? And then how does that translate into visible external stories that can really help people understand quickly what you do, why you do it, and how their lives can be transformed as a result of it. Because if we don't have clarity, then we're never going to be able to bring others into our stories and into our world to the extent that is necessary for their lives to be changed as a result. Because every single one of us has a why for why our business exists, why we maybe work there if we don't own it. And so the strength of our why translates into a story that then builds connection and resonance with the audience listening. And Harvard found that 95% of the purchase decisions take place in our subconscious, which is where our emotions live. So the more we're led from within, from this kind of internal place, the more we'll actually be able to connect with others on that emotional level and allow for, loyalty, retention, trust. One of the greatest KPIs, and I learned this while doing a fireside chat in DC at Amazon headquarters. I was talking with the CMO of the fastest growing company in the US. And we were talking and we just had this amazing conversation around how customer lifetime value, which is one of the most important metrics for us to track, the indicator of customer lifetime value is trust. Do they trust you? Are they going to keep moving in relationship with you, or are they going to go to someone else? Because here's the thing. So many studies have been taken over the last 5 years that indicate people will move more towards, even if it's a higher price point, a quality experience than trying to save a buck. And so then it becomes the question of, okay, well, am I giving an experience that is memorable, that is really engaging people at kind of that emotional level? And then am I fulfilling on my service in a way that is really shining and outstanding? So then as we're, okay, so looking at the external manifestations, business decisions is one in terms of how our internal brand manifests externally. Number one is business decisions. Two is social media posts. Take those stories that are kind of the bedrock of our values. And then third, guys, go be present. Be present with people, be present in the business, be present with our families. The more you and I are putting this down, and the more we're actually able to show up in relationship, man, we bring a presence into a room when we're being led from this internal place rather than just mirroring what everyone else is doing, mirroring what everyone else is saying. The more we can really lead from an authentic place. It all comes down to authenticity when it comes to your personal brand. How well do you know who you are? And then do you actually show up in accordance with that? And here's the thing, a strong brand will always demarcate. You will always have people who love you and people who don't. And that's good. That's what a strong brand does. So if you have everybody loving you, that's not a good sign. And so honestly, when we think about it at the end of the day, it's authenticity, yes, but it's also courage. The courage to be disliked, the courage to go into the arena, like Theodore Roosevelt talks about in his speech, Citizens in the Republic in 1914. And have the ability to go into the arena and do the thing which you and I know we're called to do, and have people be the critic on the sidelines, pointing, sneering, mocking. Are we of the courage and sound mind to be able to do that? So Hybe, thank you so much for your comments. So glad you joined tonight. I haven't seen your name here before, so I'm glad you're here. Y'all, thank you so much for joining me tonight. I'm committing to keep these conversations to about 10 to 15 minutes, so I'm going to go ahead and jump off, but grateful for you. And as always, please let me know if you want help building your brand, building your business for scale, sales, succession. My partner and I at Foundation First would love to chat with you. We do free marketing consultations. So let me know if you would love help, and then we'll go from there. So in the meantime, thank you, my friends. I will see you tomorrow on the Daily Conversations with the Trade.